Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Annie of her horse Flag. Flag is a 5-year-old. Looks like quite a lovely horse. Actually reminds me quite a bit of the horse that I'm working now, Chamois. And what I would say is that would be really good videos. I hope you're a member of the fans and followers page. If you are, if you take a look back through all the posts that I've made of the horse Chamois, who's a 4-year-old that I just started, built kind of similar to this one. And would give you an idea of the steps that you need to take. Now, your question was how to get the stretch sooner, and then the way to do that is to do the work in hand first before you start doing the lunging. So we'll get to the work in hand when we get there, but that would be my best advice for you to start there. And you see that little strikeout, that's no big deal. That's just a horse. Yeah, it looks like he went for a bug or whatever the case may be, but just put his foot back down and kept going. So no big deal there whatsoever. I certainly don't think he looks very aggressive towards you. And, and they're going to play up. This is a 5-year-old horse. It takes a couple of years of work to get horses to really settle into the job. If you read any old good book on the subject, for instance, the Spanish riding school, they would lunge horses for 2 years before they ever got on them, to give them time to fully develop and continue to grow and then begin to ask for much more difficult things. And that's why we all ought to be thinking. Somehow it became sort of normal with a sort of, put it this way, bucking bronco mentality of people thinking, oh, let's just throw something on them and you buck them out and you get on them and, and they get used to it and you go. Well, the problem is you can do it that way, but it's usually the horses that end up, suffering in the process when they're trained in that way, as they can do untold damage to themselves when they start leaping around in the air and going crazy and being lunged for really long periods of time, which, lunging is a great thing when it's done judiciously. But, you start lunging a horse for an hour or two and pretty soon you don't have any legs left. So we always want to keep it to a minimum. That's why it's so important that we get the stretch right away if we can. Now, this horse is actually really quite a nice mover. It doesn't look damaged. He could be swinging a little more over his back here as we see. But, he's not a horse that's sway back, that you're having to go back to the very beginning and literally start all over again. So I like how relaxed the horse is on the circle. This is all very good. And I like how the horse is trying to find the stretch on its own. That's exactly what you want it to do. After a while, they start wanting to travel that way because it's more comfortable. Of course, when we first start training horses, there's always the issue, when horses want to see things, they have to lift their heads up. So that's part of the problem in training a little bit, that they really have to trust us and not be, looking for to find things to spook at as we go, because that tends to make them put their heads up in the air. And if they're already somewhat hollow to begin with, they start pulling with their shoulders and pretty soon everything goes down the tube. So that's why it's so important that they get relaxed and they trust us. That's why, if a horse is being, whipped at and this sort of thing, people chase horses on the lunge line, they want the horse to be kind of afraid of them. And that's not what we want. We want the horse to respect us, but we don't want the horse to be afraid of us. That's how you end up getting killed. Because horses that are afraid of us and never trust you, and the first time they get the opportunity, they will dump you. So we want a horse to like the work and like, being involved with us in the process. If they don't, they're always trying to get out of the work, which is why so many horses are resisting that we watch work. So this looks really good here, there, when he starts to drop his head down a little lower and stretch into it. And it's good when you see that, when you get that, come back as you did there to the walk and let the horse walk for a little while again like that. Because the more the horse stretches out in the walk, like this horse is doing here, the more he'll want to stretch out in the trot and then ultimately the canter. Now at this level, I don't do much cantering with horses. If they canter a little bit, then so be it. But I don't really do much cantering with horses until, we begin to back them and begin to do a little work, because the cantering gets horses fit, remember that, very quickly. So trotting builds on muscle. Cantering tends to build wind in horses. So now if you have some very overweight horses or something, that's a thing that you need to build more wind on, then you do more canter. But at this level, we want to keep that to a minimum. Now that's really nice right there. That's starting to stretch. Just a little more activity there and it would be perfect right there. You see how it really starts to stretch into the contact. So that's really good. So remember, they all have to go through this process of beginning to stretch and beginning to allow that weight to push up through their back. Ultimately, the thrust of the hind leg is what lifts the front end off the ground. So many people today are trying to lift the horse's front end with their hands and hold it up in the air, which never works. All you end up with a hollow horse that's lifting its knees up, but not its back up. It's not lifting the whole back and lifting the whole forehand, which is what we want to see. at least as dressage was considered to be some years ago, if you want to look at it that way. Unfortunately, dressage as a sport now has turned into something where the horses are very much on the forehand. They're very much moving with their knees, and it's all about a lot of high action in the front end, but not much action going on behind. But unfortunately, it's the horses that suffer for that kind of work. But you're doing really well here. I love how this horse is getting into a really good stretch. And look how rhythmic it is. When it gets there and the horse just really starts to swing over its back, that's what you're looking for. Rhythm tells you everything. When you watch a horse go and and there is no rhythm, or it's a very fast rhythm, like kind of thing, then you know that you're really probably not getting the right job done because they're just pulling along with the shoulders. We should see that shoulder swing nicely and not a lot of knee action. So I think you're well on your way here. Now, one of your questions was, what do I think the horse is ready? I certainly see what I see here. This horse is certainly ready to start lunging with a roller on at least and start to get some contacts, long side reins. I think this horse looks perfectly ready to do that. So that's the next step I would take. Love how he's stretching here. And once again, start that, it sounds like this horse has been back. So it doesn't sound like you're going to have a big problem there. But if you find that you do, if horses are very overreactive to having a saddle on their back, I always tell people, we'll come out, lunge them first without the saddle, and then add the saddle. So you've already worked the horse down. I said, I always like to build on whatever knowledge I've gleaned. So like with a horse, when the first time I'm going to put saddle, I'm going to go through everything first. I'm going to do the work in hand. I'm going to do the lunging. And then I'm going to add the saddle to the horse lunging rather than just throw the saddle on and let the horse buck itself out. As I said, horses tear themselves up when they leap around in the air. So it's very important that we don't allow them to destroy themselves in the process of trying to teach them something. Now, this is a really nice little walk you're getting there, and just exactly what you want. So you want to just add some long side reins that allows the horse to stretch deep into them, not so long that the horse is stepping on them, and not so short that they're interfering with the horse's stride, that it's not being allowed to stretch all the way down. Once again, you will hear many people talk about how deep horses should stretch, and some people, oh, you should never stretch deeper than the knees or something like that. It depends on where the horse is. Horses bring their necks up all by themselves as they start to develop top line. So generally speaking, usually when horses want to have their necks kind of straight down from the shoulders, it's usually because they don't have enough strength yet to begin to lift and carry it out correctly. So know that comes all by itself. If you watch some of the young horses I work with, like Raffaella over the last 6 months, and watch how she's just settled up into a beautiful working frame now without any effort. When the neck is ready to come up and be stabilized, it does with very little effort. You just put some higher side reins on them and lunge them, and they just stretch right over into the contact, and you have it all going on. Now, if you haven't looked at any of the videos of me doing that, be sure that you do that so you see me, that final step, which is to begin to bring the horse up by shortening the side reins and putting them up off of the higher D-rings off of the front of the saddle there, so that they mimic where your hands would be. I mean, remember, horses are never going to be much better in your hands than they are in the side reins. As Mr. Oliveira used to say, the best hands in the world just work like a pair of side reins. They just limit the length of the rein. They don't allow the rein to be pulled out of their hands, but they just limit and define sort of how big the horse can go, how much it can stretch, or how much it can stretch down, or where it needs to be. And if they've been developed correctly, they will just do that without any problem. When we bring our hands up, the neck will follow up if it can. And looking at this horse, she's not a horse, or he, I'm not sure which it is there, but this is not a horse with a real high neck set, nor do really you want one. But unfortunately, people have tried, they're breeding dressage horses with extremely long necks now to make it very easy to make them pop their necks up like saddlebreds and kind of bend them over so you can ride them hollow, and the neck looks like it's bent over, like someone who thinks that's what a horse that is on the bridle looks like. And if you try to do that with a horse like this, whose neck kind of comes straight out of the body, as you see there, this horse doesn't have the kind of neck that comes way up with its huge sloping shoulder, where the neck almost goes straight up before it comes over. Only certain breeds of horses have that. If we try to imitate that, that's sort of where the problems began, because Lipizzaners, for instance, are built very much like them. If you've ever seen them, they're very strange looking horses in the beginning. Their necks are extremely long until they really develop top line. And when they're hollow, they're really quite horrible, and that they're very easy to hollow. They're quite long in the back. And, if you don't do it right, they end up a real mess. But once again, people got used to seeing the necks of those horses, and of Andalusians and Lusitanos are these kind of horses that have those kind of necks. Once again, like they bred into saddlebreds. But the whole point that they did was to bred so that they could fix the neck into a position. But remember, and that's what's wrong with so many people's training today, is they're trying to fix the neck into position before they've developed the back that would allow that to happen. So to me, that's backwards training. We want to start from the back end, build the whole top line, and then the head and neck will come into whatever position it can and should naturally, depending on its conformation. As I said, a horse built like this, where the neck goes kind of straight out from the withers there, built more thoroughbred-like rather than Andalusian-like, if you will, or the other horses that are like that are, the big black horses, Friesians, that have those same kind of necks. And the first thing most people do with Friesians is bend the neck over and hollow their back. So anyway, so that we can't fit every, round peg in a square hole, as I like to say. They all have to find the position of the neck. If you do everything else right, will be where it needs to be when you complete the training, and as the neck comes up, it will be as high as it needs to be for the conformation of the horse. So this is really good what you're doing here. The stretch and the walk is looking really good. And look what it makes, what a difference it makes in how the horse walks and how it swings. The lower it stretches, the more active that step becomes. And that's what we're always looking for. Riding should be like music. We should be able to set music to it if it's well done. And horses also really like, when they can lock into the rhythm, it helps them a great deal as well. But they can only lock into a real rhythm when they are working over their backs. Otherwise, it all just becomes this kind of, frantic racking around with their front legs, if you will, trying to be active. And once again, unfortunately, that's what dressage has deteriorated into these days competitively. But, once again, so many horses are being destroyed because, people don't have the kind of money to buy these new horses, that have this exaggerated movement and these necks like saddlebreds, and, and they're very expensive horses. That's kind of what they've done to it. They've made one kind of, this is the kind of horse you must have if you want to win in dressage. Any other thing is not looked at anymore because, how they developed breed prejudice. That's just the people who got control of the sport and sent it in the direction that they wanted it to go for the commerce of them selling horses. If you look who is on a lot of the committees in the dressage world and various things, they're very often breeders. It's like in racing, it's the breeders who've kept 2-year-olds, running because, they know that they're going to break down. They're going to sell more horses if they breed 2-year-olds. If you go to England where they run 3-year-olds, they have a 60% lower breakdown rate than we have. So once again, look how beautifully this horse is just finding that stretch. That's exactly what you want to find to do. Now, when you get to right there, you could ask for maybe a little bit more activity, but you're doing a really good job for what you're doing here. Try to keep the slack out of the line, trying to keep your circle as round as you can, but you're doing a great job with this. And this horse is really developing beautifully. So the next step would be put a saddle on, as I said, lunge with just the saddle on. Don't add the side reins until the horse just is accustomed to the saddle. And if your horse hasn't had a saddle on in a while, as I said, start with the lunging first. Lunge the horse and then bring the saddle out, put it on it, walk it with the saddle on, and then lunge it a little more with the saddle on. So we get the horse, used to something before we just throw it at it and hope for the best, And I said this idea of, making them buck it out. It isn't necessary to do that. And it just damages the horses in the process, and some of them get very damaged from it. But I really love how relaxed this horse is. It really reminds me a lot of Chamois that you see me working. And if you kind of look at how I've taken that one, and added the side reins and the saddle, we're now just starting to get on that horse. But everything is there. And also look at how I work the work in hand from the ground, just, teaching the horse to actually lead correctly, but along my shoulder, keeping the horse ahead of my leg by holding the whip behind my back and softening her in the mouth. So I'm teaching the horse everything that it needs to know about being ridden before I get on it, which makes a lot more sense, than just jumping on and hoping for the best. As I say to people all the time, if you were building a car in your garage, you wouldn't take it on the street till you had brakes, right? Well, why would you get on a horse if the horse knew nothing about what a bit meant or what your leg meant or anything else? You're just asking for a difficulty. So once again, we want to survive riding. And if we just take a few of these safety steps, and one of those is getting the horse to like the job. They like the job that we do. They're a lot less likely to try to kill you in the process. But this is really nice. I said, all I add here is just a little more, if you can get that a little more active than it is. So you want to look at that place when the shoulder starts to swing a little and see what happens there, kind of see how short the step becomes behind because the horse drops its back and all of a sudden it can't step underneath the body anymore. So that's what you want to keep looking at. Watch the hind end of the horse and what's happening. You see now it's becoming too slow. kind of stabbing the front legs. The knees start to come higher and the hocks start to fall out behind the horse. So that's what we're looking to avoid as you go on. But I like how calmly you're approaching it all, and that's just the way you want to do it. So many people make the mistake of chasing horses on lunge lines, and then they get the horses crazier and crazier, and every day it's a longer chase. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, veterinarians started telling people that lunging is bad for horses because the way most people were going about it, it was bad because they end up lunging for hours at a time. And that's never good. We'd like our lunging session to be, 10 to 20 minutes. That should be about it. If it's taking longer than that, you might have a horse that's, fractious one day, and it might take a little bit longer than that, but it should get easier the next day. If it's not, you're not getting into that place where it's taking you about 20 minutes or so, if it's getting longer and longer, then something is not going quite right. Now, once again, if you're only walking, that's a different story. You can do an hour of walking on the lunge line if that's all you're doing is walking. And that's the beauty of the walk with young horses, that we're able to build a lot of top line. We're able to teach them a lot of things. As Nuno used to say, the walk is where we explain everything to the horse. So before you take off in the trot and canter, it's nice to have explained to the horse what the bit means and what it means to turn. And all this can be done very easily and very softly in a walk. As soon as you add a little more movement to that, it becomes more difficult. And of course, if the horse can't stay over its back while you're riding it in trot, as far as turning and these kind of things, nothing is going to work correctly because the action of the bridle will not go through the body of the horse if the back is not up. So that's why horses end up so heavy in the hands. If you know what you're doing with riding, a loose ring snaffle is all you would ever need to train a horse. Because as soon as the back unlocks and you can get the horse to lift its back, every horse will become soft in the mouth. And I've worked many, many horses that people said it would be impossible, and had horses going in all kinds of elevator bits and you name it. And you get them to move over their back, and all of a sudden the jaw can relax and the pole can flex correctly. It's all correct. It's all connected, just like to a person. Try bend over and really arch your back as hard as you can and see what you can still do at the same time. You'd find even walking would be extremely difficult. So that's what people are doing to horses when they hollow their backs and expect them to keep doing, especially high-level movements. And this is all good, and some people would say, well, the horse isn't active enough. I would rather that you wait at this pace and just keep the horse going a little bit till it starts to relax. You don't want to start to chase a horse because you think it needs to get underneath itself. And that's kind of one of the mistakes that people make, is they think they're trying to drive the back end under the horse. But if the horse is hollow, it just goes faster. It makes faster little stabbing motions with its legs. It doesn't necessarily begin to move over its back. And every horse has a moment. If you start to go too fast, the concept of inertia is the weight of the horse trying to drive forward. And once it really starts moving, that starts driving onto the forehand. And after a certain speed, it becomes impossible for the horse to get off of the forehand, which is why it's so important that we keep the gaits relaxed in the beginning, like you are doing here and doing a very good job of it. So as I said, when you can, try to activate a little more, but not to the point that you have the horse running around the ring. Never be trying to, drive the back end under the horse with the whip. It does not work. And that's what we see people doing all the time with short side range. They get on horses and they put them in very short side range and just keep trying to whip the back end up underneath the horse. So that just ends up with a very horse usually damaged or broken at the third or fourth vertebra, or just completely out of its mind and behind the bridle. Now, one thing that looks very nice here, this horse, I never see it opening its mouth. It looks like it's accepted the contact with the bridle very easily. And there we see, as it goes on, it starts to relax that neck out. Now, you can see when it goes slow there, you can see how it starts to stab a little more. That is, he's grabbing with the front end and pulling with the shoulders a little bit. Once again, you can see how that is how horses become big underside of their neck, how they become U-neck, because they start pulling with that underside of the neck muscle to pull themselves forward. So we want that underside of the neck to be relaxed when we look at a horse. You know, when you see horses that have been rolkered, for instance, they look like they're kind of round on top, but if you look closely, you'll see that the bottom side of the neck is also incredibly tense, which is not what we want the horse to be like. You see there when she goes to stretch, and you see how all the underside muscles just become relaxed. That's what you want to see all the way up in the training of a horse. We never want to see that underside of the neck becoming tense and rigid against the horse, or against your hand, if you will. And of course, that's what happens when you hold horses in your hands. Really nice there. She starts to stretch. Now there would be a good moment just to lift up your whip a little bit and send her on just a little more actively forward, trying to make the circle a little bit larger there. And of course, that always, you can see how she's kind of cutting the corners on you. So you could be a little quicker to get your whip up and send her out. But by all means, this horse is ready to begin the process of saddling and bridling and probably riding, if not before long. Anyway, I always let them settle in the side reins before I'm going to start riding them. And I'd like to see you doing more of the working hand. If you watch some of those videos on the Facebook fans and followers site that I've recently done of chamois, you can see how I do that. And I am in the process of putting together a very big, long video on educational video on starting young horses, which is why I'm doing all that with chamois and also with Karen's new horse Q that we've been videotaping. So we'll be putting quite an extensive, numerous hours long video of that will be coming on the channel here before too long. Once again, just a little more active, just doing there. You see it starts to flow a little more. She starts to go there, and there you want to just get a little more swing in it, would be perfect like that. But notice how when we get that stretch, how the knees don't, like see right now, we see there's so much knee action going on, lifting those knees up. Because that's the horse really, what causes that is the horse starts to pull a little bit with its shoulders. So when you get there, now that's still a little bit on the forehand. We want it to be just a little bit more active. Once again, without driving the horse crazy, you want to get a little more swing through until she starts to lift up. And when she starts to lift up, like there, see a little bit, you see how those knees don't, they kind of swing more straight. The legs swings more straight without all the knee action. So right there, it's just a little bit more is what we want to see. But this is a beautiful horse, lots of potential. You're going to have lots of fun with this one. And this horse looks quite mature at 5 years old. And that's the interesting thing with Karen's horse Q is she's going to get quite a bit bigger. And she was just 4 last May, but she's going to get quite a bit bigger. She still is going through the hips coming higher, shoulders coming higher, growing phase. And I think we'll see that for another year with that horse. So we always have to remember with young horses that we can never think about trying to stabilize totally the neck position until the horse stops growing. In other words, we can't develop collection until growing stops. Then they'll be ready to start thinking about the added pressure of collection. And once again, if we've done our exercise, if we've done this correctly, correction is just a logical progression of what we are doing as they develop. Collection is not a new, different thing, it's simply a higher level of development of the back. It's not a separate gait. And unfortunately, people have started thinking these days that it's like a different thing, you know, grab them up and collect them up and this kind of thing. And, you know, and what most people call a collection today is nothing more than shortening the stride of the horse. It isn't really collection. It's just making the horse hollow and shortening the stride, which makes it easier for people, you know, who really have never been on the back of a horse that's up. You have to really kind of, once you do, you realize how easy it is. But, you know, many Americans, for instance, have gotten injured going over to Europe who have learned to ride in this exaggerated American forward hunt seat where they lay down on the neck of the horse, and they go over to Europe and jump horses that have been trained to jump over their backs, and they get literally jumped right off the horse. And I've known many people that have gone over to Europe and ended up in the hospital just trying out horses because of that. Because every horse they'd ever ridden in America was a flat jumper, and they were used to that and thinking they could lean forward on the neck. Now that's really a nice walk. You're starting to get there. So you've done a really good job with this. I really look forward to seeing this horse develop. Looks like a great temperament. Now right there, look how nice that walk is. It gets really rhythmic, and you see that kind of loose. You want it to look like a cat. You should see the whole ripple going through the body of the horse as it walks. There you go, like that. We see the back actually swinging. If you ever see some of the videos that some people have put up of themselves out on trail riding horses in the stretch, and you can see when they take a video straight down, you can see how the neck is moving. That's what we want to see. So the whole back swings. So once again, understanding that as you begin to ride the horse, that we're developing that back. So We want the horse to push up underneath us, which gives you a wonderful and secure feeling once the horse is really stabilized and begins to come up into working gaits. As I said, once again, so many people think, oh, well, this is going to take so long. Well, if you go back, if you read any good book by anybody who ever knew what they were talking about in dressage from the past, they will tell you the same thing I'm telling you, that it takes 2 years to put the foundation on a horse before you can think about developing collection. But that's the difference, is they're trying to force collection, which is something that can't be forced. As soon as you start forcing an athlete, the health of the athlete is going to go down the tubes, which is why so many people have this idea nowadays that horses only last a couple of years. So you're doing a good job here with the work in hand. That's really starting out nicely. I'd like to see a little more activity. So that's the only thing you need to add to that, just kind of like the lunging there, just getting a little bigger step out of the horse as you're doing this. And once again, the way to get the stretch quicker is to do this before you lunge. So once again, if I start a young horse that isn't working in the bridle, I can't do that. I start them just on the lunge, usually in a round pen, just getting them to stretch and taking it very soft. But once the horse is to where you are here, you can certainly do that. So really nice there. Once again, you can tap with your whip. You're doing a really good job with it. Remember to stay square on your feet while you're doing this. It's really good. But right there, see, you want to just add that little bigger step. But for just beginning in this, you're doing a great job. So do this first, and then after you do this, then put the horse on the lunge line, and you'll see that you get there much quicker because you've already gotten the horse to where you want it to be before you put it on the lunge line. So once again, you may have days where, if you're an inexperienced rider or a horse handler and you're dealing with, young horses that can be quite fractious, you're probably better off starting with a little bit of lunge if you can. Usually I try to encourage people to use round pens for that if they can, just so the horse isn't running all over the place and getting crazy. The round pen helps you sort of contain their energy a little bit. They don't get so crazy when they're confined. The bigger the space, there's always that issue when, like you see me doing with Chamois, I took her from a round pen. It took me a couple of weeks to get her to make that progression from working in a round pen to working in a big ring where all of a sudden she has all this freedom around her. But, it took me a week or two to get that to settle down, which it has now. And now she comes out there and works just pretty much the same as she was working in the round pen. But do this first and then add it. See right there, this is where we want to add a bigger step because now she's really kind of smelling the ground right there. So when they're just kind of like playing around and playing their nose in the dirt, that's kind of not what we want either. We want them to keep stepping and keep stepping. And that is what will lift the neck up and away. So that's a little too slow there. We'd want to ask them for a little more energy in that. But you're doing a great job. For just starting out in that work, it's really good. So if you can do that first before you go to the lunge work, that would be fantastic. And of course, I love that you've got something in your pocket for her. There are many people who just refuse to give animals anything. You don't want to turn them into a cookie monster, of course, but getting a couple of something to eat, and you'd want to do it like that when they're standing there quietly. That's when I give them something. If they're begging or mauling my pockets or something, I never give them anything where they're doing that. It's after they work, they're standing quietly, then I walk up and I give them something before it turns into an issue, and then we move on. But you and I don't like to work for nothing. I know I don't anyway. So horses are the same way. If they get a little physical reward, it makes all the difference in the world. You add a little kindness to that, and you've got a horse that's willing to come out and work for you. Yeah, that's starting to better walk. There. I love it when it starts to get a little more active like that. Now, you keep trying to bring that outside rein back towards the withers. You have to kind of reach your hand up a little bit more if you like that. But you're doing a good job. Add a little bit more activity to that, and you've got exactly what you're going to do. So this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. You've done a really great job with this horse. I'm really looking forward to seeing you add the saddle and bridle. Looks like you're well underway. This looks like it's going to be a fantastic horse for you. It reminds me a lot of the horse Chamois that I'm working with now. But you've really done a good job. This is just exactly how I would like to see a horse at this level. She's relaxed about what you're doing. She's not afraid of you. She's not overreacting to things. And that's exactly how we want it to be always. Because remember, a horse that's overreacting, that's the spooking. It's not that they're spooking at something. They don't trust you. When horses don't trust you, they start spooking at everything else. Or when something is causing them pain, they start spooking at everything else. because they're trying to tell you what's going on. So when you have a horse that works like this, he's trying to tell you, I'm happy in all this. You're doing a good job. So keep it up. I look forward to seeing your next video. It's Will Faerber from Art to Ride.